Teferi is a problem student, always late for class, no appreciation for constructive use of time. Baron. Progress report. Hello everybody, my name is Josh from Elder Drunken Highlander, and this is our deck tech video for Feign Teferi, a parody deck of a cEDH build that nobody plays anymore, that's especially not funny because of all the stacks! Chainveil Teferi is a disruptive combo cEDH deck that uses a 6-mana Planeswalker along with the Chainveil to generate infinite mana and card advantage. It plays brutal stacks and crippling control magic, and can power out early wins or stall things out into the late game. This is not that deck. This deck is a total poser. It isn't quite the right colors, it's somehow even less cEDH relevant, and when you start discussing Teferi Timebender with most Magic players, phrases such as much slower, utter garbage, and who's that get thrown around a lot. Despite these partially valid criticisms though, this deck can pack a punch and is quite the force to be reckoned with at high power and even sometimes cEDH tables. Feign Teferi is a brutally crippling stacks combo deck that aims to destroy both morale and access to mana resources while assembling a Planeswalker-based infinite mana and turns combo using the Chainveil. In doing so, it seeks to parody the play patterns of the real Chainveil Teferi decks, both mocking them for not switching to Urza and hijacking their stacks package to use for ourselves. This deck was a lot funnier when it was first concocted, and Chainveil Teferi was one of the top decks, but like how stacks decks treat their opponents, I just don't know when to let the joke die. This deck attempts to ramp like crazy in the early game, establishing a board state of big mana before the rest of the table can set anything up, so look to keep hands with ramp and a stacks piece. From there, we want to slam down a stacks piece before anyone can get too comfortable, and resolve a Planeswalker after that. Teferi Timebender is our worst walker, so if we have one in hand, we usually want to play those first. Once we have a lead, we want to hold on to it by continuing to resolve stacks pieces, keeping opponents off their spells, and amassing our combo. Our main combo is the Chainveil Teferi combo. By +2ing Teferi Timebender to untap the Chainveil, we can chain activations until we get his ult to -9. This requires 5 activations a turn, so if we untap the Chainveil each time, that means we need 20 mana. Luckily, there are ways to shortcut this. Having other walkers out like Tezzeret or other Teferis can help untap things we need. Also, crippling stacks like Stasis basically give extra turns by taking opponents' turns away from them. We can also combo out with Deep Close Gate, using our Jace or Venser to recur it and keep placing counters on our walkers. Once we have infinite turns, how do we actually win the game though? Well, mainly people will scoop once this happens, but if they don't surrender, there are a few things you can still do. The simplest is just attacking with Niambi or another creature. Tezzeret ult can also hit for a lot of damage even if we're not comboing off. We can also loop spells with Blind Obedience, draining for 1 each time. This will slowly kill opponents on our infinite turns. Mind Stone and Academy Ruins is an easy way to do it, so is Venser and Mystic Sanctuary with any instant or sorcery spell. Also, if you're on the budgetless version of this deck, Jace the Mind Sculptor's ult will kill players if used on them twice, exiling everything in their hands and libraries. Lastly, after assembling infinite mana and turns, you can exile all the cards from your opponent's battlefield using Venser or Teferi Hero of Dominaria ult. Just cast Echo of Aeons with a Narset Parter of Veils on the board, then recur the Echo once with Venser, Mystic Sanctuary, and a way to draw a card. Casting it a second time will mean your opponents draw no cards, thanks to Narset. Then, you can just pass the turn to your opponents, exiling any permanent of theirs that hits the board. Grand Arbiter Augustine will make it really awkward for them to cast any spells with only 1 land. You can then just keep simply putting cards back in your own library with either Teferi, Hero of Dominaria's -3, or recurring Echo again, and eventually, after enough turns, your opponent will run out of cards and lose the game. The main weakness of this deck is low-to-the-ground evasive creature strategies that can play through our stacks. Decks like Edric, Spymaster of Trest, or Alesha, who smiles at death, can really put the pressure on us, and if they are common in your meta, you may want to swap in some more board control. We also fold to well-timed counter magic, so make sure to watch open mana when attempting to make a crucial play. There shouldn't be much open mana anyways though, thanks to our orbs and stasis. Finally, watch out for Vandal Blast, Heliod's Intervention, Bane of Progress, or any suddenly gleeful player who asks questions such as, how many artifacts do you have there? These are the 5 groups of cards from this deck that I found important to showcase, listed in no particular order. My top 5 picks are Tanglewire. Having this card in an opening hand means we usually have the early game on lock. It is especially good with Oath of Teferi, Venser, or any other way to keep the fade counters up by blinking it. Rings of Brighthearth. This card gives us so much value. Being able to pay 2 extra to double a Planeswalker activation is really good, especially when many of those activations will untap more than 2 mana worth of artifacts. It also goes infinite with Basalt Monolith, although we have no outlets for it save Teferi and the Chain Veil. Stasis. Talk all the shit you want, but I love this card. From the wacky art to the crippling effect, this 2 mana enchantment may as well be a time walk in some cases. We can lock the board down with just a Fairy Timebender and a Felwar Stone, although there's no reason to do that unless we have some way to break parity. Heliod's Intervention. Killing rocks is very important when we play back to basics in Winter Orb. Luckily, Heliod's Intervention is very good at it. Mystic Sanctuary. We can get this one off of our fetches and return interaction or tutor. We can also blink it using top pick honorary mention Venser to loop any spell we want on our extra turns. Being able to crack a fetch or return a counterspell and then draw it with Teferi Master of Time and cast it to disrupt a threat is really strong and also feels really good. There's a budgetless version of this deck, so budget was not really a factor when excluding cards. Fierce Guardianship was left out because the Niambis just usually have chump for a turn. Board wipes were left out because my meta isn't very creature heavy at the high power level, so they're usually just dead in my hand. You can swap them back in for your meta. Creature Teferi was left out because he's 5 mana, and for the same effect as Teferi Time Raveler, I'd rather have a card that can bounce a Deep Glow Skate. There are a lot of stacks effects I left out because they don't really hurt my meta as much. Feel free to add them in yourself if you build your own version of this deck. Urza is another card that might make a good include, but I don't want to add him because he killed Chain Veil Teferi's viability and, well, my joke with it. As for power level, this is a try-hard deck. I took the idea of parodying Chain Veil Teferi using a 6-mana dual deck Planeswalker and tried to make it as strong as possible. I think I did a pretty good job. This deck is disruptive and mean. It proactively shuts down plays before they can even be made. This deck is not for casual tables. Personally, I only whip it out when we specify beforehand that we are going to go hard in our game, or when playing for prizes. Because of the crippling nature of its strategy and the speed at which it can execute it, this deck sits between the tuned high power and fringe cEDH levels. It is very close in card composition to both Smothering Arbiter and Chain Veil Teferi, both of which are fringe cEDH decks, but uses their strategies in a deck that contains at least 2 bad cards. Overall, Feign Veil Teferi is a rude, stacksy try-hard deck that is great to whip out when playing for prizes, messing around in high power or cEDH games, or just trying to flex in that sweaty Chain Veil Teferi player who always shows up to FNM. There are a few other builds out there with Niambi. I've seen her as just super friends, in control lists that leverage polymorph effects to turn Niambi into a Deep Glow Skate, and even in themed Teferi tribal decks. No matter how you build her, Niambi is a lot of fun to play and build around. Just don't make her call her dad on you. He'll put you in timeout.